Hello and welcome to our group video presentation on Canada. So just as a brief introduction, we're going to demonstrate the impact of international business factors on Canada and how both the host country and Australian firms are able to prosper in the country, in addition to areas of the business climate that should be made aware of.
Canada is characterized by its vast wilderness, being the second largest country in the world. However, the country is sparsely populated with only 37 million people due to multiple areas being unsuitable for human civilization. Canada's spoken languages are English and French, and as a result, Canadian society and legal systems mostly reflect that of Britain.
Globalization has positively impacted the democratic political economy of Canada, as their alliances with other democratic nations has allowed them to prosper through exporting, importing, and migration benefits that integrate with their mixed economy to promote profit and growth. Globalization has promoted stimulation of conversations surrounding decisions regarding foreign policy in Canada to ensure that the nation is able to compete with not only their neighbours in the US, but also compete as a powerhouse in the world as a whole. As such, policy has been formulated to ensure that the labour force has been equipped with the necessary skills and technology to not only survive, but also expand the market to ensure that reliance has been decreased and the nation's capacity for innovation and success is enhanced. Globalization as a whole has benefited Canada from multiple viewpoints. Canada has the ninth largest economy and relies on importing and exporting with their three main partners in the USA, China, and the United Kingdom. As a consequence, a high reliance on such importing and exporting truly was exposed as the COVID-19 pandemic hit, where GDP growth was in minus 6.428%. Similar was seen after the global financial crisis in 2008, where the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, explained how globalization aids in shaping the economy by being able to scale production across many different nations for cheaper costs, as well as increase the disposable income per capita for local residents. Canada is a more capitalism-driven nation rather than socialism, ranking 14th for having the most free economy in the world and 13th on the Corruption Perceptions Index. Capitalism is an important function of the political system of Canada and has allowed for much-needed growth during the continual rise of competition in all industries. Although there are many arguments against capitalism in relation to the tax rate specifically in Canada, the ability for innovation to stimulate job growth and economic activity is truly beneficial for the nation. An example of capitalism in Canada being impacted by globalization is their service sector being amongst one of the largest in the world. Such is evident with industries like retail, business, education, healthcare, and tourism contributing to 80% of their GDP. Due to having such a large portion of the nation's GDP being tied up in the service industry, it's truly important for the quality of this sector to be high, because if this area of business is generating a substantial amount of income for the country, it needs to be reputable as well as sustainable. Canada's legal system comprises a mixed combination of both common and civil law, allowing for opportunities to solve any commercial disputes for both local businesses as well as organisations from foreign countries operating within Canada. However, a negative aspect of this situation is that negotiations can be costly and have the potential to ruin business relationships to the point of no repair, meaning that all organisations looking to expand into Canada should do their due diligence to ensure they are conducting business according to Canadian law. Australian businesses attempting to enter Canada and to enter the Canadian market will have many potential issues they may incur. For example, those in the construction industry will face permit issues with an average of 250 days and a long 12-step process involved in getting paperwork sorted. Also, finding a bank that can integrate seamlessly across the two countries is needed, in addition to organising different tax grants for businesses as policies do differ from each province. Continuing on, as with all business ventures, Australian firms should be informed on the employment laws and rights of employees, which, similar to our country, has many unions across multiple industries. Furthermore, depending on the industry, there are many packaging, marketing, and labelling requirements that have legal consequences if not abided by, which certainly presents potential for legal disputes. Additionally, any business acquisitions must also be applied for to the Canadian government, and if the total asset amount is over 5 million Canadian dollars, there is potential for restrictions on deals being enforced by the government. In essence, the Canadian government's attempt to make applying for and obtaining business licenses a transparent process at both the provincial and national level means that the Canadian government does want to promote innovation and has laws in place due to their legal system to protect the intellectual property of innovators.
So the next element we're going to be talking about is Canada's economic development. Economic development is measured using the gross domestic product, which indicates the size of the economy by the total production of goods and services in the economy. For 2019, Canada's GDP was $1.742 trillion US dollars. However, 5 years prior in 2014, Canada's GDP was $1.806 trillion US dollars, demonstrating that their GDP has decreased by 64 billion over the 5 years prior to 2019, indicating a 3.54% decrease in their GDP since 2014. On the right, we see Figure 1, which shows Canada's GDP in relation to Australia and India. This highlights that Canada was producing more goods and services for the economy in comparison to Australia. However, India produced 48.9% more goods and services than Canada for 2019 at $2.871 trillion US dollars. The next element is Canada's human development. Human development is measured using the Human Development Index, HDI, which measures the 3 key dimensions of human development. These include a long and healthy life, access to education, and a decent standard of living. A long and healthy life is measured by life expectancy. Access to education is measured by the expected schooling years for children at school entry age, alongside the mean years of schooling for the adult population. Whilst decent standard of living is measured by gross national income per capita, adjusted for the price level for the country. The most recent HDI for Canada, which was recorded in 2019, gives them a rating of 0.929, sitting at the 16th highest in the world. The highest ranking for 2019 was Norway, with a value of 0.957, sitting at 3% higher than Canada. 5 years prior, in 2014, Canada's HDI was 0.918, demonstrating a 1.19% increase over 5 years. This shows that Canada now has a higher standard of living and more opportunities for their people to earn money. On the left, we see Figure 2, which shows a line graph from the UN Development Programme, outlining the Human Development Index for Canada in 2019 in relation to Norway and Switzerland, who had the highest ranked HDI of 2019 across the globe. Here we can see that for the year 2019, Canada was well below Norway and Switzerland, sitting at a HDI of 0.929 in comparison to Norway's 0.957 and Switzerland's 0.955. So for an Australian firm to consider establishing a presence in Canada, the HDI is more valuable than the GDP, as it reflects a better understanding of human development. The GDP does not consider methods of creation, of accumulation of wealth, and does not measure a standard of living whatsoever. When moving a firm to Canada, analysing the people's lifestyle and how they grow their wealth is most important to determine if an Australian firm is setting themselves up for success. Whilst the GDP also measures wealth of a country, it doesn't measure the levels of inequality within a country, whether there be a gap between the rich and poor, as well as whether there is a political or social discrimination. These are all factors which outline the habits of consumers within Canada, and without this indication from the HDI, it could result in the Australian firm failing in Canada, as it isn't tailored to the people of Canada and their current average financial situations.
There are many similarities between Australia and Canada, possibly more so than between any other two industrialized nations. Due to their shared political and cultural history with the British Empire, both nations share a number of institutions, including a federal system of government, a bicameral parliament, and the rule of law. In terms of population and their status as relatively open commodity exporting nations, the economies of Australia and Canada are comparable. They both have tight ties to the United States, the world's most powerful nation economically, diplomatically, and in terms of security. The relative performances of the two nations have changed over time, which is why I think they are edging closer in comparison rather than further apart. So the Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions are a framework that may be used to determine the cultural distance between Canada and Australia. This framework demonstrates how a society's culture affects its members' values and how these values connect to behaviour. The first cultural factor to be calculated is called power distance, and it measures how much the less powerful members of a nation's institutions and organisations expect and accept that power is allocated unequally. Canadian culture, which had a score of 39 on this category, is categorized by interdependence amongst its citizens and an emphasis put on egalitarianism. Australia receives a low ranking of 36 on this metric as well. In Australian workplaces, hierarchies are created for convenience, superiors are readily reachable, and managers rely on the knowledge of specific workers and teams. The second cultural dimension is individualism. This dimension's fundamental concern is the level of interconnectedness that a society maintains amongst its members. People in individualist societies are expected to take care of themselves and their immediate family. People in collective societies are members of in groups that look out for them in return for allegiance. Canada has an individualist culture and receives an 80 on this metric. Australia, on the other hand, is classified as having a very individualist culture and has a score of 90 on this dimension. This results in a loosely knit community where individuals are expected to look out for themselves and their immediate families. The next dimension, categorized by being masculine or feminine, Canada scores 52 on this dimension and may be categorized as a somewhat masculine civilization. A high masculine score indicates that the society will be driven by rivalry, achievement, and success. While Canadians strive to achieve excellence in work and life, the culture is generally more reserved when it comes to accomplishment, achievement, and victory. Australia is regarded as a masculine society and receives a score of 61 on this metric. The next dimension, which is uncertainty avoidance, is concerned with how a society responds to the reality that the future is always uncertain. The Canadian culture is more uncertainty tolerant, as evidenced by the easy acceptance of new ideas, inventive goods, and a readiness to try something new or unusual, as indicated by the country's score of 48 on this dimension. Australia ranks 51 on this metric and is a nation that is uncertainty accepting, just like Canada. In order to address the issues of the present and the future, any community must maintain some linkages to its own past, which leads us to this dimension, which is long-term orientation. However, different civilizations place different priorities on these two basic objectives. Canada receives a score of 36 in this area, indicating that the society is normative. People in these societies are normative in their thinking and strongly concerned with discovering an unchanging truth. Australia has a normative culture and receives a 21 on this criterion. Based on how they were raised, this dimension, indulgence, is described as the degree to which people attempt to regulate their impulses and inclinations. Given its high score of 68 in this area, Canadian culture is categorized as indulgent. People who live in these communities with high indulgence scores typically show a readiness to follow their impulses and inclinations when it comes to having fun and enjoying life. Australia, which received a score of 71, is also an indulgent nation. Given that Australia and Canada have both high Hofstede scores, we can conclude using this framework that there is little cultural separation between the two nations. Additionally, accounting the performance of the Canadian and Australian economies can be compared in terms of the rates of GDP and per capita income growth, as well as the contributions to economic growth from labour and capital inputs. Moreover, accounting for Canadian and Australian economic growth and per capita income as seen in the table 1 here on the right. Since the middle of the 1990s, the rate of the population growth in Australia has accelerated. Between 2010 and 2021, Australia's per capita income growth slowed to match Canada's, but this is partly because of Australia's greater population growth rate. The faster pace of this economic growth in Australia is the result of greater growth contributions from labour and capital. Since the early 1990s, Australia's population has continually grown more quickly than Canada's, mostly due to immigration, which is reflected in the expansion of the labour force. According to Purchasing Power Parity, the nominal GDP per capita for Australia and Canada in 2008 was roughly 7,000 USD and 9,000 USD respectively. Real GDP per capita growth in Australia has outpaced that in Canada since 1990, indicating that the Australian labour market is a little bit more adaptable than the Canadian one, but nonetheless quite similar.
According to Smith, a country should participate in international trade in items they have an absolute advantage in. But Ricardo believes that a government should trade in products they have a competitive advantage in manufacturing. In using this theory, Canada has a clear edge over most other countries worldwide in terms of agricultural goods. They have this absolute advantage because Canada is the second largest country in the world, meaning Canada has a plentiful supply of natural resources. Forestry, fishing, agriculture, mining, and energy sectors are significant contributors to the industry. According to Smith, This gives Canada an absolute advantage over other countries in producing these goods. It increases Canada's ability to manufacture them efficiently due to their natural endowment. But Canada also has a competitive advantage as they have highly educated labor force and a high diversity rate. Canada should select Adams' theory of absolute advantage instead of Ricardo's competitive advantage theory when engaging in international trade. Canada has a definitive advantage in agricultural industry, and they are earning majorly by exporting goods from these industry. So they should continue doing this. In 2020, Canada exported around 168 billion worth of agricultural goods, making up 45.3% of their exports in 2020. This makes this a crucial industry due to economic advantage it provides for Canada. Also, the government supports this industry by making policies which support firms in this industry and provides them subsidies to lower the cost of production. Trading in this industry will help improve international relations with other countries, as other countries won't be able to produce the same product as efficiently as Canada. They will import the products they require. And as Canada will trade with other countries to fulfill their demand, they will improve their relations and lower the tariff and quotas, increasing sales in long run. This will allow consumers to try different Canadian products worldwide, enhancing their quality of life and helping the countries flourish through continuous trade between nations. International trade will help promote world peace, goodwill, and mutual understanding between countries. Economic interdependence between countries will help lead to profound cultural relations of avoiding conflicts. Also, it will increase efficient resource allocation and utilization since countries seek to manufacture items in which they have a competitive edge. When these countries manufacture for advantage, the uses of unnecessary resources will reduce, protecting the environment by preventing dangerous emissions and reducing waste. Also, it will boost production efficiency because countries aim to adopt better manufacturing process to keep costs down and remain competitive. Countries that can manufacture a product at the lowest possible price will be able to earn more significant market share. As a result, there is an incentive to manufacture efficiently. This will assist in raising the product standard. This, in long run, will increase the demand for Canadian product. Also, the international market provides new opportunities for a new line of service or product explore. It may allow you to specialize in a new field to serve the market or to increase efficiency by developing new technology. Exposure to other countries' products and culture may inspire innovation, enhancement, and efficiency in your goods and services. This will lead to an increase in sale, the revenue generated by the workers over time. This will create demand for more Canadian product, which in long run will create jobs as they would need to increase production to meet the consumers' demand. This will increase the country's GDP in long run. So these are the reasons Canada should specialize in the agricultural industry.
Firstly, Canada have tariffs which are applied to certain imported goods. They use the harmonized commodity description and coding system to classify these imported goods. This forces exporters to provide a description of the product so that the correct tariff can be applied. For Australian firms, the goods that they export to Canada are likely to be subject to the MFN. However, there are some that may have a different tariff applied due to Canada. In terms of import quotas, Canada has implemented a supply management system that provides protection to its domestic dairy, poultry, and egg industries. This implementation means that foreign agricultural products, which are typically cheaper, do not flood the market, therefore providing protection to the local farmers. Canada still allows imports of these products into the country. However, if imports exceed the quota, then a significant tariff is levied. For example, 300% for the price of butter. Canada provides subsidies to the extraction, agriculture, and automotive manufacturing industries. These subsidies provided to the extraction industry were designed to support other industries, such as agriculture, forestry, and ordinary businesses and consumers, because the local inputs are significantly cheaper, therefore helping industries remain internationally competitive and providing stability for Canadian workers. This is reflected through the US importing 85% of its natural gas from Canada. In terms of automotive manufacturing subsidies, $1 billion subsidy was provided to support jobs, provide necessary funds to respond to new electric car demands, and also protect the industry's international advantage of scientific excellence and related skills. The Canadian government has CEMA, which provides governance against foreign firms exporting unfairly cheap products to Canada. The Act will determine whether products that are being imported into Canada will cause harm to local Canadian firms and industries, and if they are, the government will apply a duty to the products to increase their price in line with domestic products, therefore ensuring that domestic Canadian firms are not subject to unfair competition. In terms of international trade theories, some scholars have argued that Canada's high number of protectionist policies are consistent with the theory of mercantilism. However, this should be disputed as Canada relies greatly on international trade to improve living standards and economic prosperity. This means that mercantilism's zero-sum mentality is inconsistent with Canada's situation, as Canada instead would be at a loss in terms of income and living standards due to the high level of imports that they rely on. On the other hand, it can be argued that Canada has a comparative advantage in agriculture and extraction of materials, with these advantages assisting other industries such as the automotive manufacturing industry. Due to Canada's limited infrastructure, growing conditions, and suitable building sites, the country is only able to produce a small quantity of products, and they'll have to import the rest, therefore only producing the products that they have a comparative advantage in. The Canadian government provides supports in subsidies, import quotas, and anti-dumping policies to these specialized industries so that Canadian producers can remain efficient at what they do best, as well as because Canada relies on these industries for their economic prosperity, for example, with 120 billion Canadian dollars coming from the extraction industry. We may understand that Canada has a comparative advantage in the industries we have discussed, but it's important to also understand why Canada has international success in these industries. For basic factors, Canada has an abundance of natural resources due to large geographic size. For advanced factors, Canada has the most educated labor force in the world, with 62% of Canadians aged 25 to 64 years having post-secondary qualifications. Canada have very sophisticated and educated citizens, but they do not demand enough innovation and entrepreneurship from Canadian firms. This has released pressure on local firms, ultimately resulting in industry concentration to worsen and lead to an oligopoly, therefore giving these firms significant power and greater ability at cutting costs. The extraction industry is linked with the automotive manufacturing industry and are both internationally competitive. The abundance of natural resources available in Canada allows for cheap minerals and materials to be available to be used in the car manufacturing process. However, there is a lack of rivalry amongst Canadian firms due to the oligopolistic competition, which significantly hinders the development of a competitive advantage, therefore meaning that there is little incentive for existing firms to think outside of the box. The Canadian government should either be helping new firms enter the market or providing incentives for R&D and related innovations.